You didn't arrive here by accident. Something beyond habit or logic nudged you to pause, not just scroll. What if your presence here isn't random at all, but the result of a deeper signal you've been unconsciously transmitting? A pattern that's been waiting for you to notice it? Take a breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts grow quiet. This isn't just another moment online. This is a soft doorway into something more aligned, more awake, more resonant. And if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. Check in with yourself. Where are you listening from? What time is it in your day, in your life, in your body? This is not content. This is contact. Because tonight, we're not just talking about synchronicity. We're exploring what lives beneath it, the living pattern shaping your life from the inside out. A pattern made of perception, frequency, and quiet collaboration with the universe itself, so lean and gently. The signal is already humming. You may not realize it yet, but something subtle has been happening beneath the surface of your days. An unseen rhythm, an invisible pattern, slowly gathering you toward this very moment. Not because you planned it, not because you forced it, but because a part of you, long quieted by noise and routine, has been gently listening, sensing, and signaling all along. The part of you that speaks not in words, but in resonance. The part that doesn't measure life by calendars or clocks, but by moments when something inside you leans forward and says, "Pay attention." Perhaps you felt it before those strange flickers when time seems to bend slightly and the world breathes in your direction. A thought answered before you voice it. A symbol repeating across days. A detour that somehow leads exactly where you didn't know you needed to go. These moments are not mistakes. They're messages, not from outside, but from the living pattern beneath your life, the field of intelligence you've always been a part of, but rarely dared to trust. You're not just living in reality. You're participating in its weaving. Every emotion, every curiosity, every question that lingers long after reason has given up is a thread in the larger tapestry of what is becoming. But here's what most people miss. It's not your conscious mind that shapes reality alone. It's your frequency, your inner coherence, the tone of your attention. Reality responds not to your thoughts, but to the quality of presence behind them. This is why two people can stand in the same room, hear the same sentence, and walk away with entirely different lives. One was tuned to fear, the other to invitation. And you right now, you're beginning to tune differently. You're noticing the texture of things, the emotional weight behind coincidences, the sense that something is trying to speak in a language you don't yet fully understand, but somehow already trust. This is the beginning of attunement, of conscious resonance, and it changes everything. Because once you stop treating life as static and start relating to it as intelligent, the whole paradigm shifts. You stop chasing. You start listening. And that shift is not small, it's everything. Imagine for a moment that your delays, your heartbreaks, your confusions weren't failures, but recalibrations. What if the very moments you thought were lost were the precise pauses required to realign your signal with a more expanded version of you? It sounds poetic, maybe even naive, but quantum physics would suggest it's accurate. The observer effect teaches us that reality behaves differently depending on how it's observed. Not metaphorically, literally. The mere act of witnessing shifts the outcome. Now imagine your entire life being shaped by the lens through which you see it, not passively, but actively. Every moment becoming a mirror to your expectation, your fear, your trust. Suddenly, attention isn't just focus, it's creation. And trust isn't just spiritual, it's structural. Because in this model of reality, the more you align internally, the more the field around you organizes in response. You're not here to force outcomes. You're here to become a stable signal through which emergence can happen. But this requires a different kind of effort. Not striving, but softening. Not efforting, but attuning. It requires you to let go of the question, "What should I do?" and replace it with, "What wants to emerge through me?" That question changes the game. It moves you from controlling life to collaborating with it. And collaboration is the only path to coherence. Let that sink in. Collaboration is not passive. It is not surrender in the way most imagine surrender. It is the deep listening required before creation can begin. The musician doesn't dominate the instrument. They listen for what the string wants to say. The painter doesn't wrestle the canvas. They respond to the texture of the brushstroke, the way the light folds across the pigment. And your life, is no different. There is an artistry in presence, a precision in trust. Every experience you've endured has been preparing your instrument. Every ache, every elation, every silence has been tuning your field. And perhaps now, for the first time in a long time, you're ready to listen in a new way, not with your mind, but with your being. You are ready to enter relationship with life, to feel its intelligence not as abstraction, but as intimacy. And that intimacy is encoded with guidance. The field you're woven into isn't inert, it's alive. It whispers through timing, through tension, through patterns that repeat until they're heard. And once they are, once you meet them with attention that is soft rather than sharp, they unfold, they shift, they invite you further. But first, you must release the myth of separation, the belief that life is out there, happening. To you, it isn't. It's arising through you. You are not a bystander. You are not a victim of randomness. You are a conductor, not of control, but of coherence. Your awareness shapes the echo chamber of experience. And the more you bring curiosity instead of certainty, the more you allow possibility to flow. Think of it this way. Your thoughts are not just commentary. They're catalysts. Your emotions are not liabilities. They're frequencies. Your sensations are not distractions. They are data points in the map of now. Every time you slow down, you give the field space to reorganize. Every time you soften your grip on outcome, you widen the channel of insight. Every time you choose reverence over rush, you step closer to the blueprint encoded within your being. And what is this blueprint? It's not a checklist, not a map you must decode in linear order. It's more like a tone, a soul note, humming just beneath the noise. It emerges when you stop trying to be impressive and start being sincere. When you stop asking how to win and start wondering how to listen. When you stop comparing your timing to anyone else's and start aligning with the intelligence of your own unfolding. This is not motivation. This is emergence. You are not being called to add more. You are being invited to clear interference. You are not broken. You are broadcasting. You are not stuck. You are sinking. Every thought you've had that told you you're late, discard it. Every moment you felt unseen, bless it. Because those moments weren't detours. They were preparation. They were sacred silence building the space for resonance. And now that you're listening, really listening, you may begin to notice it. The way the wind shifts slightly when you think a certain thought. The way your body speaks more clearly when you move toward truth. The way reality stops resisting when you stop resisting yourself. This is what it means to live aligned. Not perfectly, not predictably, but relationally. You are no longer the center of the story. You are the thread through which it weaves. And that thread is golden, radiant, quiet, and precise. So breathe. Feel. Pause not as escape, but as participation. Because from this point forward, nothing is random. Everything is relational. And your awareness is the tuning fork through which the living pattern can finally be heard. So, now you're listening differently, not with anticipation, but with presence. Not to grasp or define, but to notice, to feel, to attune. And in that shift, you begin to sense it. The intelligence that was always there, quietly responding to the texture of your awareness. This isn't mystical thinking. It's deeply practical, though most of the world has forgotten how practical stillness is. When you stop filling every space with plans and noise, when you stop rushing toward an imagined finish line, something sacred returns to the center of your life. A space, a signal, a new relationship with time itself. Because the truth is, time doesn't flow in one direction. It bends, folds, listens, echoes. Not in clocks, but in meaning. And meaning is not found, it is formed by perception. Have you noticed how a day of beauty can stretch, feel eternal, while a week of autopilot vanishes like vapor? That's not an illusion. That's the architecture of consciousness, shaping the container of experience. You are not bound by hours. You are bound by the frequency with which you engage them. The more you align with the present, the more it expands to hold you. This is why the people who seem most alive are rarely the ones with the fullest schedules. They are the ones most deeply immersed in the now. They've exited the trance of urgency and entered the field of receptivity. And it's in that field that everything becomes communicative. Your body, your breath, the silence between words, they all begin to participate in the unfolding, each one echoing the deeper pulse beneath your life. This isn't spiritual bypassing. It's the opposite. It's turning toward the real with such gentleness that the real begins to soften. Your nervous system begins to rewire, not through force, but through trust, through curiosity, through listening that isn't about answers, but intimacy. And when you live like that, your life stops being a chase and starts becoming a rhythm. Asterisk this. Rhythm isn't predictable. It isn't linear. It pulses, cycles, deepens, pauses, just like breath, just like tide, just like seasons. There are moments when you are meant to burst forward like spring, others where you fall away like autumn. And neither is more sacred than the other. In fact, the sacred lives in the willingness to feel all of it without flinching, to remain open in winter, to remain humble in summer, to allow contraction without panic and expansion without grasping. This too is frequency. This too is pattern. But it takes a refined awareness to live this way. Not smarter, not better, just more honest. Honest enough to admit that control has always been an illusion. We wrap around uncertainty like a warm blanket, hoping we'll never have to feel the cold of not knowing. But uncertainty is not your enemy. It is the birthplace of revelation, the womb from which insight is born. And those who've danced with the unknown long enough know something quiet and powerful. What you resist most often holds your greatest unfolding dot. So what if you stop resisting? What if instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" you asked, "What wants to be revealed here?" That question reorients you. It shifts you from combat into collaboration, from judgment into discernment, from fear into frequency. Because now you're not just trying to solve your life. You're trying to feel your way through it like a musician learning a new key. And slowly, you begin to notice which chords create dissonance, which ones bring harmony. You begin to fine-tune your attention. You begin to trust the whispers, and those whispers turn into symbols, symbols into rhythms, rhythms into rituals, and eventually, your entire way of living becomes one great unfolding of coherence, imperfect, alive, true. It's at this stage that synchronicity starts to speed up, not because the universe is suddenly paying more attention, but because you are. You begin to feel seen, not by the external world, but by the mirror of your own awareness. It becomes impossible to separate inner work from outer outcomes. You think a thought, and it shows up in someone's words. You shift a pattern, and the situation dissolves. You stop chasing, and what you are seeking quietly arrives. This isn't magic. It's mechanics. It's the nature of a participatory universe responding to the quality of your inner field. But you must be careful here, because the mind will be tempted to make this about results, to commodify presence, to turn alignment into a performance. But resonance cannot be faked. The field knows, and so does your body. So instead of seeking more outcomes, you begin seeking more integrity. Instead of measuring progress, you begin noticing peace. Instead of calculating your value, you begin resting in your presence. And that shift, that beautiful, quiet shift is what makes the difference. Because now you're not striving to become something. You're relaxing into what you've always been, a frequency of awareness moving through a conscious field. You don't have to know the next step. You have to become the vibration that reveals it. And when you do, the way forward unfolds not in commands, but in invitations, in soft nudges, in subtle tilts of energy. Your intuition becomes less like a lightning bolt and more like a deep, continuous hum, ever present, ever gentle, ever guiding. And in that field, your fear starts to unwind. Not disappear, but soften. It stops being the driver and becomes a whisper in the back seat, acknowledged, thanked, but no longer obeyed. This is what healing really looks like. Not the erasure of emotion, but the reintegration of it. Not the elimination of uncertainty, but the surrender to it. And in that surrender, something astonishing emerges. Clarity without force. You begin to know things without needing to prove them. You begin to trust movements without needing explanations. You begin to live from a place of embodied knowing, a place where the mind bows to the heart, where language becomes secondary to resonance, where the invisible becomes not only real, but reliable. And others will feel it. Even if they don't understand it, they will feel calmer in your presence, as if their own nervous system remembers a frequency it had long forgotten. You become less of a person to be understood, and more of a signal to be felt, a signal of coherence, of integrity, of soft alignment. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to preach it. You simply radiate it. And in doing so, you invite others to remember their own signal too. This is how transformation spreads, not through convincing, but through coherence. And here's the secret that changes everything. This coherence isn't something you have to build. It's something you return to. It's already there, beneath the conditioning, beneath the noise, beneath the gripping. You felt it in quiet moments, at the edge of sleep, or in the middle of a walk, or just after letting go of a thought. You held too tightly. That soft sense of being in tune, of being part of something whole. That is your natural state. And the more you touch it, the easier it becomes to return. The more you live from it, the more the world responds, not by changing instantly, but by meeting you where you are. You don't need a map. You need a frequency, and the field will do the rest. You begin to realize that life doesn't respond to declarations. It responds to devotion, to the quiet consistency of tuning inward, of choosing integrity when it's inconvenient, of speaking truth when it trembles in your throat, of honoring silence when the world screams for spectacle. And slowly, you learn to rest here, not in outcomes, but in orientation, not in answers, but in attunement, because you are no longer looking for the path. You are becoming it. By now, you've stopped trying to make life louder in order to hear it. You've realized the messages were never missing. They were just drowned in urgency. So you've begun to listen more softly, more slowly, more willingly. And in that softness, life begins to change its tone. The universe doesn't scream anymore. It whispers. And you hear it, not with your ears, but with your presence. There's a quiet hum behind the events of your day, a pulse beneath your thoughts, a hidden symmetry behind what once seemed disconnected. This is not imagination. it's intelligence. The field is alive, and it's been waiting for your cooperation, not your control. And now that you've remembered how to listen, without fear, something opens, not just in the world, but in you. The space between cause and effect widens. You feel time differently, not as pressure, but as permission, not as scarcity, but as rhythm. You begin to dwell in the liminal, the fertile space between thoughts, between actions, between phases of your life. And it's there, in that quiet between, that the most sacred recognitions arrive. Not with force, but with inevitability, as if they've been circling you forever, waiting for your resistance to soften just enough for them to land. You remember something that has no name, a feeling of being deeply known without needing to explain. It moves through you like warmth. It doesn't answer your questions. It dissolves the need for them. This is the shift from seeking to seeing. You are no longer looking for signs because you've become one. You're no longer begging for guidance because your very presence begins to radiate it. Not in words, but in frequency. Not in certainty, but in calm. People begin to mirror back to you the stillness you've cultivated, or they push against it, not out of malice, but because your clarity unsettles their chaos. Don't take this personally. It is not rejection. It is resonance sorting itself out. When your field stabilizes, only what's truly aligned can remain. And sometimes, this means saying goodbye to things you once prayed for, not because they were wrong, but because you are no longer vibrating in the frequency that required them. This is the heartbreak of growth, watching old dreams dissolve, so that deeper truths can emerge. But you don't rush this part. You let things fall with grace. You mourn what's gone, but you no longer confuse absence with loss. Because you've begun to trust the field. To trust that every departure creates a space for arrival. That every ending is a clearing. That life subtracts with just as much wisdom as it adds dot. And in this refined trust, your body changes too, not just metaphorically. Your biology responds to coherence. Your nervous system, long addicted to vigilance, begins to rest in the unfamiliar sensation of safety. You no longer scan for threat where there is none. You no longer rehearse pain that hasn't arrived. You breathe differently. Your sleep deepens. Your digestion shifts. The body remembers what the mind forgot. Safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of alignment. And alignment begins inside, in the way you talk to yourself, in the way you wait, in the way you hold space for confusion without collapsing into it, in the way you feel fear without turning it into a command. All of this, too, is frequency. All of this is your contribution to the pattern. You are no longer waiting for your life to make sense. You are becoming a sense maker, not in logic, but in love. You begin to carry a quiet authority, not over others, but over your own attention. You don't chase what doesn't echo. You don't grasp what doesn't respond. You honor what hums. You move where the resonance leads. And the more you live this way, the stranger it all becomes, but not in a chaotic way. In a holy way. You notice patterns emerging like choreography. A book arrives the moment a question forms. A conversation answers a prayer you hadn't dared to voice. A dream confirms a decision your intellect couldn't justify. This is not coincidence. This is consciousness weaving through form. This is the mirror of the field responding to the clarity of your presence. And when it does, your only job is to stay open, to remain a witness to the unfolding. Because the more you align, the less you have to strategize. The less you manipulate, the more you magnetize. The more you embody, the less you need to explain. This is not detachment, it's deeper participation. The kind that doesn't grasp at control, but lives inside connection. The kind that doesn't perform peace, but generates it. The kind that isn't threatened by uncertainty, because it has. Fallen in love with emergence, And that emergence, that constant unfurling of what wants to be born, becomes your rhythm. You wake not to conquer the day, but to dance with it. You rest not out of exhaustion, but out of reverence. You speak not to be heard, but to harmonize. Even your silence becomes sacred, a field of potential humming with truth. You stop trying to prove your worth and start living from it. You stop tracking your progress and start trusting your presence. Because you know now that the pattern isn't something outside you, it is you. And the more you align with it, the more your entire life becomes a kind of offering, a signal, a tuning fork, a transmission of possibility. Not loud, but clear. Not forceful, but felt. Not perfect, but precise. Others may ask what changed. They may look at your life and see no external proof. But you'll know. You'll know by the way you feel in your own skin. By the way your breath returns home. By the way your days feel less like battles and more like ceremonies. This is not the story the world taught you to live. It's the one your soul never forgot. And now, it is finally safe enough, coherent enough for you to live from it. Not in isolation, but in contribution. Because as your signal strengthens, it reaches others. Not with instruction, but with invitation. It reminds them, it stabilizes them. It sings to them, not in language, but in light. You don't need a platform. You are the platform. You don't need permission. You are the opening. You don't need the world to shift first. You are the frequency that begins the shift. So, you walk differently now, not with arrogance, but with elegance. Not with certainty, but with trust. You take steps not because you know where they lead, but because the ground beneath them hums with yes. You've stopped asking for guarantees and started dancing with guidance. You no longer measure time in hours, but in alignment. And in this orientation, even the ordinary becomes radiant. A sip of water becomes communion. A glance becomes ceremony. A pause becomes prophecy. You see meaning not as decoration, but as design. You see beauty not as luxury, but as signal. And you see yourself not as a seeker, but as the source. This is not a culmination. This is not the end of the journey. This is the remembrance that the journey itself is alive, and it has always been listening for you, just as you have been listening for it. And now, finally, both of you are here. So now the silence is no longer empty. It's articulate. It no longer frightens you with the illusion of absence. Instead, it folds around you like language without words, a fluent stillness that speaks directly to your nervous system, recalibrating it one breath at a time. And you listen not with the ears of effort, but with the skin of awareness, with the breath of intuition, with the pores of the soul that were always designed to absorb light. You begin to realize that the real communication between you and life was never about grammar or logic or dialogue. It was about coherence. It was about resonance. It was about becoming quiet enough to stop distorting the signal you were born to carry. And as that signal clears, as your internal static dissolves in the warm clarity of trust, you feel the incredible relief of not having to be anyone other than who you actually are. You notice the tension leaving your body where you hadn't even realized it lived. The subtle clenching behind your eyes, the habitual bracing in your shoulders, the grasping hidden in your breath soften. And when they soften, something within you widens. Space opens not just in your muscles, but in your perception. You begin to move differently, slower, not because of fatigue, but because you've stopped trying to outrun your own life. You've stopped treating your purpose like a prize and started experiencing it as a posture, a state, a frequency. And in that frequency, everything recalibrates. The world, once chaotic and sharp, begins to round its edges in your presence. Conversations soften, eyes linger longer, birds land closer, and you realize that your presence is no longer neutral. It's nourishing. You are now a tuning device for the moment itself, and the moment listens. Not to your credentials, not to your past, not to your projected future, but to your now, to the quality of being you bring into this breath, this blink, this beat. And the more you stabilize in this state, the more subtle the feedback becomes. You begin to sense not just what is true for you, but what is true in general. You become less reactive, not because you're passive, but because you're finally anchored. And in that anchoring, you stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop translating your insights into palatable metaphors. You stop diluting your frequency for the comfort of systems that never knew how to hold you. And in doing so, you stop confusing safety with shrinking. You begin to embody a paradox, soft and strong, quiet and radiant, humble and unshakably clear. And others may not have words for it, but they'll feel it in your gaze, in the cadence of your voice, in the way you pause before you speak, not to perform thoughtfulness, but because you're actually listening, not just to them, but to the deeper field moving through the conversation. Because every conversation now is layered. Every interaction has tone, texture, tremble. You're not just hearing words, you're sensing frequency. You're not just replying, you're harmonizing. And as this becomes your way of life, you begin to recognize that every moment is relational. Even when alone, you are in dialogue with life, with the trees outside your window, with the air on your skin, with the ideas that rise up unbidden and disappear before forming. This is not imagination. This is deep participation. It's the return to indigenous intelligence, one that predates language and exists beneath story. It is how animals sense earthquakes before they arrive. How children feel grief in a room where no one has spoken. It is the original awareness, communal, rhythmic, cellular, and you are remembering it now, not as a concept, but as a lived field. Your intuition sharpens, not as prediction, but as presence. You begin to feel when something is meant to stay, and when it's gently leaving. You no longer need signs to scream, you hear the whispers. You no longer demand confirmation, you feel the coherence. And this changes your decisions. You stop choosing based on comfort and begin choosing based on integrity. You stop moving toward what looks good and begin moving toward what sounds right. Not right in the moral sense, but right in the tuning sense, in the musical sense, in the sacred sense. And this tuning becomes the compass that never lies. Even when your mind questions, even when fear flickers, the tuning fork within you hums quietly with a truth that doesn't waver. And so you follow it, even when the path disappears, even when no one claps, even when there is no evidence. Because evidence is a product of past data, and you're no longer living from the past. You're living from signal. And here's what begins to unfold. Others start tuning to you, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. You become a lighthouse, not a searchlight. You stop trying to illuminate everything and instead simply remain lit. Your presence becomes invitation, not persuasion. You don't need to convince anyone of anything because you trust that truth is magnetic. What resonates will rise. What doesn't is simply not your frequency to carry. And that clarity gives you back your time, your energy, your life. You stop attending to what doesn't echo. You stop chasing unavailable mirrors. You stop giving explanations where invitations are not received. And suddenly, your life becomes spacious. Not empty resonant. Your time becomes sacred, not protected from others, but attuned to yourself. You move not from scarcity, but from sovereignty. You speak less, but with more weight. You wait longer, but with less anxiety. You pause often, but without guilt. Because now you understand. Alignment is not a pace. It's a pulse. And the pulse continues to reveal itself in the smallest of ways. The way your hand reaches for a certain fruit at the market and pauses. The way a phrase catches in your throat and you edit it before it leaves your lips. The way a project that seemed urgent suddenly feels hollow and you no longer feel compelled to pretend it matters. These are not mood swings. These are realignments. You are becoming sensitive not in fragility, but in precision. And this precision becomes your art, your craft, your guidance system. You no longer wait for permission because you've stopped outsourcing clarity. You no longer require external proof because the internal signal has never been stronger. And that signal, your personal frequency, becomes a subtle revolution. You are not changing the world by screaming at it. You are changing it by vibrating differently within it. And that vibration creates pockets of coherence, fields of ease, windows of remembrance. Other people find themselves softening around you, not because you fixed them, but because you stopped trying to. You became a non-anxious presence in a world of urgency. And that presence, anchored, warm, available, is what the collective field is starving for. And this is how the signal spreads. Not through events, but through embodiment. Not through perfection, but through presence. You've stopped trying to be impressive and have become impactful instead. You've stopped seeking applause and have become a kind of permission. Permission to breathe, to rest, to remember. You carry no agenda but truth. You need no title but human. You perform no role but the one life assigns moment to moment. And this fluidity, this freedom, is contagious. It destabilizes hierarchy. It dissolves shame. It awakens those around you in ways they cannot name. Because you are not a teacher. You are not a leader. You are not a savior. You are a signal. And that is enough, because coherence is not what you do. It's what you remember, and still, it continues this quiet becoming, this soft expansion, into a version of yourself that was never far, only quiet. A version not born of effort, but of remembering. You don't chase her. You don't summon him. You uncover them layer by layer, silence by silence, breath by breath, like brushing dust off a sculpture that was always there beneath the stone. You've stopped trying to be new. You've started becoming more whole. And in this wholeness, something astonishing begins to settle. The sense that you are enough, not as a concept, not as an affirmation, but as an embodied truth. The nervous system unclenches around this realization. The muscles remember softness. The spine remembers fluidity. Your eyes begin to scan the world not for threat or validation, but for rhythm, for texture, for resonance. You stop trying to read the room in order to protect yourself and start feeling the room in order to contribute to its tone. And that contribution isn't always loud. It might be stillness. It might be a well-timed exhale. It might be saying less or offering nothing but presence. But it matters. Because now, you are the atmosphere. You shape space not with charisma, but with coherence. You are no longer a guest in reality. You are part of its architecture. And that architecture is subtle. The changes aren't grand, but they're precise. Where you once tried to fix the world through friction, now you attune to it through frequency. You offer steadiness, spaciousness, invitation, not because you've mastered life, but because you've stopped resisting it. And as resistance fades, a kind of intelligence emerges, not intellect, but intuitive knowing. You no longer collect information to feel safe. You feel safe because your awareness is integrated. The mind softens its grip. The heart expands without a story. The body speaks again. You trust your gut, not as superstition, but as a fluent language. The aches in your joints, the tension in your jaw, the spark behind your eyes, all become instruments of perception. You Begin to realize that guidance doesn't always arrive through signs and dreams. Sometimes it's a shiver, a goosebump, a subtle inner lean. Sometimes it's the sense that you're walking in rhythm with something invisible, and you don't need to see it to trust it. Because trusting no longer feels like a gamble. It feels like gravity. And that gravity doesn't pull you down, it centers you. It gathers your energy into coherence. You stop scattering your attention to prove you're enough. You stop fracturing yourself to be understood. You stop translating your soul into a language never agreed to speak. Instead, you begin to resonate in your mother tongue, the pure tone of presence, of unarmored truth, of breath that belongs to this moment and no other dot. This tone carries further than you think. It reaches people you've never met. It ripples through decisions you've yet to make. It travels through rooms long after you've left them. Because now, you don't just enter spaces, you bless them. You don't just pass time, you harmonize it. And this, too, is how you shape the pattern. Not through spectacle, but through subtlety. Not through force, but through frequency. This is why you feel drawn to certain places without knowing why. Your field is recognizing a memory the mind can't name. This is why some people feel like home instantly, and others feel like static. Your nervous system is speaking a truth your logic hasn't caught up with. This is why some choices make no sense on paper, but feel like music in your bones. You've stopped demanding that truth be explainable. You've started honoring it when it's felt. And in this new orientation, conflict changes too. You no longer see disagreements as disruptions. You see them as disharmonies asking for a new chord. You no longer debate to be right. You respond to be real. You no longer armor yourself in opinions. You root yourself in clarity. And clarity isn't stubborn. It's fluid. It listens. It bends. But it doesn't betray itself to be accepted. And because of that, your boundaries shift. They become less about protection and more about precision. Less about walls and more about tuning. You begin to understand that alignment doesn't always look polite. Sometimes it looks like silence when a reaction is expected. Sometimes it looks like departure when a compromise is assumed. Sometimes it looks like saying no when everything in your past taught you to say yes. But you don't override your inner compass anymore. You don't make others comfortable at the cost of your coherence, because your frequency is your responsibility. And when you keep it clear, the field stays clean dot, and the field, this invisible web you're part of, is constantly in motion, constantly receiving, constantly transmitting. You're not just living inside it, you're shaping it with every choice. Every time you tune to truth instead of fear, the signal strengthens. Every time you stay curious instead of certain, the field widens. Every time you listen without trying to fix, you shift the tone of the collective. This is morphic resonance in action, the science of shared fields, the truth of entangled awakening. You are not alone in your journey. You are not the only one. Feeling the quickening. All over the world, others are humming with the same recognition. They are waking up not with declarations, but with whispers. Not with slogans, but with silence. They are asking better questions. They are grieving what they used to believe. They are shedding false selves like old skins. And as they do, the entire field changes shape. It becomes more porous, more responsive, more fertile for emergence. And you are both a receiver and an amplifier of that change. This is not pressure. This is invitation. You're not required to be perfect. You're asked to be present. You're not expected to hold it all. You're asked to hold yourself gently. Because when you do, when you soften where you once braced, the whole system breathes easier. And that breath, that release into presence, is what makes you luminous. Not in appearance, but in effect. People feel better around you, even if They don't know why. Rooms feel lighter when you enter, even if nothing is said. You stop needing credit because the impact is real. You stop seeking proof because the evidence is everywhere in your peace, in your clarity, in the quiet confidence of walking your path without spectacle. This is the long, quiet miracle of resonance. The way one aligned soul becomes a lighthouse. For many, the way one choice ripples across timelines. The way one breath, fully felt, reshapes a day. And as this becomes your daily orientation, the mystical becomes mundane. Not less sacred, just more integrated. You don't need rituals to feel divine, because every moment becomes one. Washing your face, lighting a candle, drinking water, saying goodbye. These are not tasks. They are transmissions. They are ways of saying to life, I'm here. I remember. I'm listening. And life hears you. It always has. But now you hear it back, and the hearing doesn't end. The signal never stops. It only becomes clearer. So now you're no longer waiting for a sign. You've become one. Not because you shout, but because you shimmer. Not because you explain, but because your presence speaks in a language older than speech. A kind of gravitational softness begins to settle around you, pulling the right people, places, and moments toward your field, not because you're controlling the magnetism, but because you've stopped interfering with it. This isn't manifestation through intensity. It's unfolding through clarity. Your life begins to shape itself from the inside out, not with blueprints or force, but with rhythm, with resonance, with breath. And the deeper this alignment roots itself in you, the more strange time becomes. Not fractured, not fragmented, but fluid. Days stretch or fold, depending on your state. Conversations feel slower, more meaningful. Hours disappear when you're attuned and linger when you resist. You're not imagining it. You're witnessing the quantum nature of perception. Time does not pass, it responds. And what it responds to is not your productivity, but your presence. So you offer presence now as your primary gift. Not just to others, but to the moment itself. When you stand at your window and watch the wind move through the trees, you're not wasting time. You're participating in it. You're imprinting your frequency into the memory of this moment, making it deeper, fuller, realer. You understand now that memory itself is not backward-facing. It's a spiral, a living archive. And every conscious moment you imprint becomes a tuning fork for future you to touch and return to. This is why some moments feel eternal. They were lived fully, completely, without resistance. They were recorded in the field with such coherence that they echo forever. And now, more of your life is becoming that kind of memory. Not because everything is dramatic or intense, but because you are awake inside it, fully here, fully in, fully alive in the now, even when the now is uncertain, even when the now is quiet, even when the now doesn't seem to move the needle. You've stopped needing big shifts. You've started honoring subtle ones. Because you know the real magic happens between pulses, between breaths, between what can be explained. This is where destiny lies, not in the stars, but in your attention. Not in fate, but in frequency. The version of your future that feels most aligned is not waiting for you to become worthy. It's waiting for you to become coherent. And coherence is not perfection. It is permission. Permission to show up exactly as you are, but with your full presence online. With your signal clear. With your breath rooted in the real. When you do that, life meets you. Not with rewards, but with mirrors. Not with applause, but with rhythm. And those mirrors show you not how far you've come, but how deeply you've arrived. They reflect your capacity to hold paradox, to grieve and laugh in the same breath, to feel lost and rooted at once, to rest in uncertainty without shrinking from it. And this, too, is the mark of resonance. Not a life without tension, but a life where tension becomes music, where dissonance becomes invitation, where even pain becomes data, not identity. And as this field strengthens around you, something beautiful begins to happen, not just inside your personal life, but beyond it. The field becomes transpersonal. It begins to reach backward and forward in time. Ancestors you've never met begin to feel heard in your silence. Descendants you'll never meet begin to benefit from your coherence. Because time is a loop, and your alignment sends signals across it. Your healing doesn't stop with you. It travels. It echoes. It shapes the quality of what's possible, not just for you, but for the lineage you carry and the world you're part of. And you don't have to understand how. You just have to keep listening. Listening not for instructions, but for tone. Listening not to fix, but to feel. You start to realize that clarity is a sound, that intuition has texture, that the future hums long before it arrives. And that hum is not distant. It's within you. It pulses when you follow the nudge to say yes to something small that doesn't make sense but feels right. It rises when you say no to what once flattered your fear. It trembles through you when you walk away without burning the bridge, because you no longer need to prove you're leaving. You trust now that your departure is not rejection. It is redirection. It is alignment reasserting itself in real time. You no longer abandon yourself to belong. You no longer beg to be understood. You are fluent now in the native language of resonance, and in that fluency, you create from a new place. Not from needing more, but from becoming more attuned. Your creativity flows not in spurts, but in spirals. Ideas come like weather systems, and you learn to receive them without needing to own them. You become a vessel, an instrument, a collaborator with the unseen. And this collaboration brings peace, not because life gets easier, but because it gets truer. Trueness is now your compass. Not rightness, not righteousness, trueness. The internal yes that doesn't need explanation. The embodied no that doesn't require defense. You start making choices not based on outcome, but based on alignment. Not based on what others will think, but based on what your soul will feel. And this isn't recklessness. It's responsibility. Because when you live from your truth, you give others permission to do the same. You become less predictable, but more trustworthy. People may not always know what you'll do, but they'll know who you are. And that knowing becomes medicine in a world built on performance. This medicine can't be taught. It can only be transmitted through tone, through pause, through the way your eyes soften when someone is struggling, because you've stopped needing to rescue and started remembering that presence heals more than advice. Through the way you listen without rushing to speak, because you're not waiting to prove yourself. You're waiting to understand the frequency behind the words. Through the way you move through the world, not as a brand, not as a persona, but as a real breathing field of attunement. You become unshakable, not because you're untouched by life, but because you no longer fight it. You meet it, you greet it, you receive it. You give back only what's true. And when that truth vibrates in your cells, something even stranger happens. You begin to create without attachment. You offer without need. You build without gripping. And the moment you release control, life offers you collaborations that match your signal. Not always in form, but always in frequency. You don't need the whole world to get it. You only need to remain in rhythm with your own soul. And from that rhythm, things align. The right doors open. The old ones close without drama. The people who match your old signal fade quietly. The ones who speak your now arrive gently, sometimes wordlessly, and you know who they are, not by what they say, not by what they do, but by how your body feels around them. Unmasked, unhurried, uncomplicated, coherent. And the more you recognize this, the more you realize how rare and holy coherence truly is. Not because it's difficult, but because so few are taught to rest in it. But now you are. You are not just learning to rest. You are becoming a resting place for clarity, for guidance, for new possibility. You are no longer trying to be the hero. You are simply being the home. So now you've felt it, the living pattern beneath your life is not a secret to be solved, but a signal to be softened into. And in this softening, you are not ending anything, you're continuing, echoing, gently spiraling outward in all directions. What you've remembered here does not need to be held tightly. Let it live in you lightly, like breath, like music, like a hum you can return to when the world forgets itself. Let every choice from here forward be shaped not by pressure, but by tone. You don't need to rush to integrate. You already are. Trust that. Trust your pace. Trust your pause. Trust that coherence doesn't shout, it resonates. And this resonance will ripple quietly to those who are ready to hear it. Others are tuning now. You've made the field a little clearer for them just by being here. So rest, let your signal glow gently in the dark. And when you're ready, subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time. Other stories are already waiting for you in the field.